Hello, and welcome to this 5-part instructional guide on how to build a computer from start to finish. In this 5-part video series, we will cover all the major steps and processes needed to build a custom desktop computer, as well as some special configuration changes to make the computer more effective. These steps will include selecting components, computer assembly, OS installation, driver installation and OS updating, hard drive partitioning, and finally backup creation. So, let's get started. For this video, we'll be covering selecting parts and components. We won't be covering the exact specifications of the parts. We're looking more at the information needed so that all the parts fit together properly, as well as any other information related to the final assembly of the computer. The first part of the computer we're looking at is the processor, the brain of the computer. Selecting a good processor is important since much of the computer's speed and performance depends on it. The i-Series by Intel is a popular and reliable unit, but for our purposes the only value we're concerned with is the socket value, which reads LGA1150. The importance of this value will be explained in a moment during the next component. The next component is the motherboard, the nervous system of the computer. This is where the processor, RAM memory cards, and video card will be attached to. There are several pieces of information that must be kept in mind when looking at the motherboard. The first is the socket. It tells us what size and type of processor will fit, and there is no room for error, for that socket type will only match that processor. And in our case, it is a match to the value we mentioned earlier in the last slide. The next is the RAM slot type, and on this motherboard it's DDR3. This will be explained more in a moment. The next piece of information is the video card slot, which in this case is PCI Express 3.0. This is the current standard used for video cards. Remember this for later. The last figure needed is the data cable type, and in this case it's SATA or SATA. These ports are used for the hard drive and ROM and DVD-ROM drives that we'll be looking at as well in a little bit. Moving along, we now get to the RAM or memory of the computer. These cards save information while the computer is running, and they also have a big impact on a computer's speed. On this slide we can see that the RAM cards are type DDR3, which matches our motherboard, meaning they will fit and operate properly. Now we get to the video card. And as the name suggests, it is responsible for getting images to appear on the computer monitor. There's a lot of information related to this component, but the only value and figure we care about is the video card input type, which in this case is PCI Express 3.0, just like the motherboard had. This means that the part will fit properly into those slots on the motherboard. Now we get to the hard drive, where all the information in the computer is stored. The figure we're concerned about is the data port type, which is SATA or SATA. The same as the motherboard, meaning that these two pieces can be cabled together properly. The CD-DVD-ROM drive is the exact same, needing a SATA data port to link to the motherboard, which it has. Now, on to the power supply, and as the name suggests, it provides power to all the components in the computer. The main focus of the power supply is its wattage. Depending on how much hardware you have in your computer, it will affect how much wattage your computer will need, but on average between 500 to 600 watts is recommended for a custom-built computer. Lastly is the case. It holds all the parts and components and protects them from external damage. There are several types of case, and depending on how much hardware you have in your computer, it will affect how big your case will need to be. We're going with a mid-tower case, which is a common and popular option. It's lightweight and holds a reasonable amount of hardware with still some extra space for making upgrades and making improvements or changes over time. That concludes our first video, and next video we'll be covering the computer assembly.